It is Friday, March 7th. This is Landon Blake, ruggedly handsome, land surveying extraordinaire. It's another truck brain dump I'm doing on my commute to work. This is part two in a series of brain dumps on record of survey maps that I'm doing for Britt and Cosette at our company. They asked me for a little bit of extra training and background on record survey maps, trying to get that taken care of for them. I'm only about 3 months behind. On the first brain dump in this set, I gave a broad overview of what record survey maps, why we have to follow them, where you can find the rules for them. In this second part of the set, video 2, I want to talk for just a few minutes about the basic types of records of survey that we prepare at our company. There's not very many, only a handful. That will help Britt, Cosette, and it might help other surveyors too. They've seen maybe all of these surveys except for one type. So they're going to be familiar with some of them, but I don't know that we've talked about them as a group. So it might help them understand each map type and how they're different from one another. So let's start with a list of the types of maps, records of survey maps. Bear with me because this is unscripted. First type of record of survey is record of survey, a control survey, what we call a control survey, geodetic control survey. I don't know that we've ever done one of those at RH. We have done some geodetic control work for large scale boundary surveys and large scale right-of-way surveys and some infrastructure projects, but I don't know that we have ever been paid by a client to actually file a record of survey of that. So that is not required by law. But occasionally you'll have a city, county, or utility company say, hey, we've got some vital data tied to this control network, these control coordinates, and to make sure that people can locate things in the proper location in the future, we want to have you file a copy of your control survey at the county, make it official on a record of survey. That's called a control survey. It typically shows control point symbols and usually a table with control point coordinates and descriptions. Sometimes you'll get notes about methods of the actual field survey and information about the adjustment and the statistical confidence that the surveyor has in the network. Sometimes you'll get some background map data, some parcels or street center lines. They usually cover a pretty large area, a town or a county or a multi-county area. Could be a large area. It could be a very large area. Could be a state, whole state. The second type of survey, record of survey map, that we could potentially prepare at RH is a record of survey for for what we call a record land net. So record land net is where we go in and we establish record locations of a large number of parcels, but we aren't fully resolving the boundaries of those parcels. We may not be mapping all of the easements and other coverages on the parcels. This is usually done for one or two reasons. One is just a planning level. There's some kind of infrastructure project and there's a design team engaged at the planning level. And we end up doing a record of survey on the record boundary, not usually because the client asked for it, but because we know at some point that we've hit some kind of trigger. For example, we found a material discrepancy or conflict in the record data that we need to get into the record. The other reason we will do a record land net is on right-of-way projects when we're preparing land description packages for right-of-way acquisition. We don't necessarily need to fully resolve everybody's individual parcel that we're crossing, depending on how we write the deeds, the land descriptions for the right-of-way acquisition. So we'll do a record land net because we want a pretty good idea where those lines are so that the appraiser can calculate acreages, eh, that sort of thing. That'll show typically GIS parcel lines with some found monuments and may have some record bearings and distances on it. Might have some measured bearings and distances. All of our bearings will be on the same basis bearing. It's a little more fleshed out than a control survey, but not as fleshed out as a record survey for a fully resolved boundary. It's what we call record land net. We're not the only organization that does them. Caltrans does them. And California Department of Water Resources does them, and other municipal agencies do them. The third type of record survey that we'll do is somewhere in between a record boundary and a fully resolved boundary. It's a record survey of a boundary survey where we don't fully resolve all the segments of a parcel boundary, but we fully resolve the portion of them. We don't do that a lot, but we do it on our forest surveys. When we're doing forest surveys, we're typically concerned about the boundary between national forest land or BLM land, private land. And we're not being paid typically to survey the whole boundary of the private parcels or the federal parcels. The feds only care about the boundary between the private land and the federal land. So that's the only thing we survey in the monument. We still look at the deeds and interpret the land descriptions, but we're not setting monuments, fully resolving the boundaries of all the parcels involved, especially if we have good evidence of the line location we're interested in. We have section corner monuments or aliquot monuments. We're not going to spend a bunch of time surveying off the line. That's case by case, and there's some judgment involved there. But so that's a hybrid in between a record boundary and a fully resolved boundary survey of the entire parcel. So that would be the fourth type of record survey. That's what we typically do. Our typical record survey is where we've fully resolved every segment of a parcel boundary. And then we're filing a record survey to memorialize that. I talked in the first video about a couple of reasons why we might do that. That's the most common type of record survey that we work on at our shop. And the reason why is because most of the time, that's what you need. You need a fully resolved boundary. If you're going to do any kind of land development or you're doing an alt survey on a parcel, you need a fully resolved boundary. You can't just do one line most of the time, and a record boundary isn't going to work. You got to really do it. You got to go all the way through the process for every segment of the parcel boundary. The last type of record survey that we do at RH, and this is probably the second most common, is what we call a monument preservation. That survey is created to memorialize the position of monuments that might be disturbed or destroyed during construction. It's typically property corner monuments, but occasionally control monuments. And we do a fair amount of those. I think it's the second most common type of survey we do. And they look a lot like a control survey. So we will typically have um, a parcel background, GIS parcel background usually. And we will show symbols where the monuments are located. And then we'll have a point table with coordinates for each monument and descriptions. Or we will show bearings and distance ties between the monuments at risk and some reference monuments, some control monuments that are set outside of the construction zone, the construction footprint. And then we have some standard notes that go on. So those are the five types of records of survey. Just to review them again, super quick bullet list. We've got control surveys. We've got record land nets. We've got surveys where we've only resolved a, a portion of the parcel boundaries. So we haven't resolved the entire parcel. We've just resolved a select number of the segments. Then we have fully resolved boundary of the entire parcel, all of the parcel segments. That's number 4. And then number 5 is monument preservation record survey. Those are the 5 types. We do all of them at RH. Like I said, I don't know that we've filed a control survey yet at RH, but we certainly do the other 4 types of surveys on a regular basis. The most frequent are the record survey of a fully resolved boundary and a monument preservation record survey. I hope this information will help Britt and Cosette understand the types of record of survey maps that we file and about information shown on each type of map. In the next brain dump, I'd like to talk about the technical requirements for a record of survey map under the law and the map checking process in California. I'm going to try and stick to the technical information because I think that's important. So we'll cover that on the next brain dump. I hope Cosette and Britt find this helpful.